Welcome to Train Signal. This is the Managing Mobility Options lesson in the Windows 7 Administration Training course. In this lesson, you'll learn how to enable work on the go for your mobile users by using offline files. You'll get a glean of transparent caching, learn how to save energy by configuring local power settings, and get a look at location-aware printing. GlobalMantic wants to make sure that every salesperson is equipped with a laptop to use in order to maximize their time on the road and with customers. Every customer visit has to be as productive as possible, and technology has to be an asset, not a hindrance. GlobalMantic doesn't want to see any of their salespeople foregoing technology because it's too cumbersome or too complicated, or they can't get their work done. All of Windows 7's mobility capabilities, including offline files, caching, location-based printing, and power policies, must be leveraged to maximum effect. Increased mobility leads to increased sales. The more time a salesperson can spend with a customer, the more money they're going to make for the company. Battery life and power settings must be optimized to increase the road time, the maximum amount of time that a salesperson can be on the road. Salespeople still need access to their centralized files and folders, however, to do their jobs. Location-based printing will help these mobile professionals locate available printers so they don't have to dig around all the time when they visit different regional offices looking for an available printer. Perhaps the most important topic of interest for mobile professionals lies around the use of offline files. Users, particularly of the mobile variety, can't always be connected to a live server. After all, they're on the road from time to time, at least that's what you hope. Road warriors still need access to some of their files, however. What Offline Files does is it actually caches copies of server-based files on the Windows 7 desktop. As the user roams around the country, he works from the locally cached file. So let's say he's cached a Word document on his local machine by enabling Offline Files. As he works on that Word document, that copy of the file in the local cache is being updated. Once that user reconnects to the file server, maybe he stops into a regional office at GlobalMantic, the cached file automatically synchronizes back with a server-side copy. As space becomes a premium, as offline files begins to take up too much space, the amount of space is actually dictated via a policy, by the way, Offline Files automatically begins removing the least used cached files to reclaim space. And you can use the Synchronization Center, short the Sync Center, to resolve synchronization conflicts. For example, suppose that the remote user that was on the road happened to modify a file, but his assistant happened to modify an internal copy of the file at the same time. When he reconnects to the network, the system's not going to know which copy of that file to synchronize back to the server. So you'll use the Sync Center to resolve this synchronization conflict. Here's a look at how Offline Files actually works. In step 1, the user enables Offline Files for a particular file, and that's designated in the blue. And the copy of that file is then cached to the local machine. And this is a blue document with a little squiggly around it. Now the user disconnects from the network. You'll notice the orange line is gone to go on the road. The user then copies or modifies that locally cached file while he's disconnected from the server. To denote that, I've changed the file to green to show that it's different, but it's still cached. Notice that the server-based copy of the file is still blue. It doesn't know anything about this modification. In step 3, the user reconnects to the network. The modified file is automatically synchronized with the server-based copy, so the changes the user has made automatically flow up to the file server from which they came. There are 4 operational methods by which offline files can operate. Online mode is normal connected access to server-based files. This is really not even using offline files. It's called online mode because it's not offline. Auto offline mode, which will be denoted by offline not connected, which you'll see later on, will happen when network issues take place. So for example, suppose you're working in the office and you lose connectivity with the server. Well, when these network issues occur, Offline Files moves to this auto offline mode, which redirects file operations such as browse, open, create, read, and write operations to the offline copy of the file. Manual offline mode will be denoted as offline working offline. users can actually force Windows 7 to use the offline copy of the data at will, and in this case, it'll be denoted as working offline. In slow link mode, which has to be enabled via group policy, you can allow a transition to offline mode when a network connection slows down. You can say when a network connection gets below, say, 100 kilobits per second or 200 kilobits per second, it's usually definable. You can say that we're going to start using the offline copy of a file over this slow connection. There are some group and local policies that are related to offline files that we'll take a look at in a few minutes. The most important policies are whether or not you want to encrypt the offline file's cache, what files cannot be cached. You can actually indicate what kinds of files cannot be cached by offline files. And you can actually remove completely the ability to make files available offline. For security purposes, some organizations don't want to allow their users to be able to cache local copies of files on desktops or laptops or any other types of machines. They want to keep these files completely stored on the server and not allow them to be moved to a desktop. These organizations may completely remove the ability to have files made available offline. We're going to go over to a machine now, and we're going to take a look at these offline file policies, and we're going to use the Sync Center in the control panel to take a look at how offline files works, and we're also going to go through a demonstration of offline files in action. Here we are back at our trusty GM7075 machine, and I'm going to connect to a file server that I've established in the GlobalMantic domain called GM_File. On this file server, you'll notice a folder called Shared Docs, and there's 5 files in this Shared Docs folder. We're interested in the first 3. Called File 1, File 2, and File 3, these are the documents that I'm working with on behalf of GlobalMantic right now. As I go on the road, I want File 1 and File 2 to go with me. So I'm going to right-click File 1 and choose Always Available Offline. And you're going to notice this little window pops up that basically says completed preparing files so that they're available offline. And I'll do the same thing with the second file, and it'll take it just a second. What's happened now is those files have been synchronized down to my local PC. And if I right-click those files now, you'll notice that there's a sync option. So I can sync the selected offline files if I want by hand, manually basically. Now I'm going to simulate walking away from the GlobalMantic headquarters with my laptop by disconnecting from the network. And all I'll do is I'll choose local area connection and I'll disable it. And what this will do is cut this machine off from the network, thereby making GM_File inaccessible. Or is it? That's our Shared Docs. Now, notice something. There are still 5 files available. However, only File 1 and File 2 are visible, and they still have these little green synchronization items next to them. The other 3 have X marks next to them, showing that they are not available. And right now, you're noticing that offline status is offline not connected, and offline availability is available, showing that these files are available. Now, if I double-click one of those files, I can make a change to it. And now I can save this file. And I can do that all day long if I want to. If I reopen that file, you'll see those changes are actually there. Well, if I go over to the file server that houses these files, and I'm going to open up File 1, those changes don't appear. And the reason for that is because I'm working in offline mode. I'm actually working with a cached version of the file, not the original version of the file. While I'm over here, I'm going to make a change to File 2. And I'm going to save it. So, File 1 has been changed on the client. File 2 I've changed on the server. But I'm also going to make a modification to File 2 on the client. And I can do this to my heart's content. And I'm not going to bother with the other files because they're not accessible right now. you can see that I'm not able to open GM file shared docs file 3.docx. Now I'm going to reconnect to the network, and then I'm going to pause the video to allow this synchronization process to take place. Oops. I'll re-enable the network connection. And then all I'm going to do is wait for about a minute, and then I'm going to come back. And we're back. And let's see what happened. We're going to start by going to the control panel and to the sync center. This is going to tell us if there were any issues with the synchronization. You're going to notice that the last sync has occurred and there was a conflict during this synchronization. And if we click that button, it's going to tell us that on file 2, a file changed on this computer and the server while this computer was online. Now there's a number of options we can take to rectify that situation. We can right-click the file and choose View Options to resolve. You can decide which version you want to keep. You can keep this version of the file which is on this computer, which is the local computer, if you like. Or you can keep the version that's on the server, or you can keep both versions, which is what I'm going to do. Now here are the results of the synchronization, when it started, when it was completed. And here's some other information about offline files. But let's go take a look at the offline files first. So we'll click the button here to go to our server-based copy of the files. But let's open file 1 first. Notice there's a new file here called file 2 administrator v1. File 1 is just as it should be. That's what we made the change to. File 2, administrator v1, is the client-side version of the file that we modified. File 2 is the server-side edition of the file. And that's what we expected to see. So this worked. Basically, the synchronization process did exactly what it was supposed to do. When we click from the Sync Center, Manage Offline Files, you notice there's a number of items you can configure here, including disk usage, encryption, and network. Starting with the General tab, you can open the Sync Center, completely disable offline files, or view your offline files. On the disk usage item, you can decide how much disk space you want to allocate for offline files and for temporary files. To change the disk space limit, click the Change Limits button and choose from the slider bar how much disk space you'd like to allocate for offline files and temporary files. Your offline files can be encrypted if you go to the Encryption tab and click the Encrypt button. On the Network tab, you can decide on slow connections should you automatically work offline. Check for a slow connection by default every 5 minutes. I also mentioned that there were a number of group policies that have to do with offline files. So I'm going to start the local group policy editor. We're going to computer configuration, administrative templates, network, offline files. And there are a number of items here that you can modify to decide how you want offline files to operate for Global Mantix. There are a few things that are enabled that I've already played with a little bit, but we're not going to be doing a whole lot with them. You can configure background synchronization, limit the disk space used by offline files. You saw just a second ago how you can decide how much disk space you should allocate, but you can also do that through a policy that then you enforce throughout the organization. Windows 7 also supports something called transparent caching, which is sort of similar to Windows 7's new branch cache feature. The branch cache capability will be covered in the lesson entitled Managing Branch Cache, so we're not going to cover anything about branch cache here, and we're only going to touch on transparent caching in this lesson. Transparent caching locally and automatically caches copies of files that a user has accessed from a server. You don't need to do this on a per file basis like you do with offline files. Basically, once you've decided that you're going to transparently cache something, it just happens. The user doesn't have to do anything. Each time the user accesses the file, the local system verifies that the locally cached copy is the current copy of the file. If it's not the current copy of the file is opened directly from the server. Now, the big difference between transparent caching and offline files is the files are not available offline. When the server is unavailable, the local cache is also unavailable. So if you can't get to the server, you can't get to the locally cached copy of the file either. Now, you may wonder then, what's the point? Well, it really reduces network bandwidth, and one of Microsoft's big deals right now is reducing the cost of ownership of Windows 7, which includes keeping bandwidth costs low. So, using transparent caching, you can keep your bandwidth costs lower by transparently caching files in the background and not copying them back and forth to the server all the time. Transparent caching also supports both domain and non-domain joined clients, whereas branch cache will only support domain joined clients. Transparent caching is not enabled by default. You have to open up group policies that are related to offline files at computer configuration, administrative templates, network, offline files. We'll go over and take a quick peek at this, but we're not going to do too much with it here. We'll learn more about transparent caching in the lesson entitled Managing Branch Cache. I'm going to change the setting to sort by name. And you'll see here that if you enable the policy for transparent caching, then you enable transparent caching, basically. That's all there is to it, is enabling this policy. Everybody wants to save power, and GlobalMantic is no exception to this rule. By using power plans in Windows 7, you can configure local power settings and policies that match the needs for GlobalMantic, especially for mobile users. This allows you to decide how the computer will operate under different power environments, whether it's plugged in or whether it's on battery. Your battery options in the power settings will only be available on computers that actually have batteries. So if you're setting power options for a desktop computer, you won't even see the battery options available in the power settings. There's a ton of different power settings from which you can choose, including display settings that include power configuration and brightness, again, depending on what kind of computer you're on. Brightness is not available necessarily on a desktop computer, but it is on a laptop computer. Sleep settings and advanced settings. Different settings all of the settings are available for each configured power plan, and we'll be looking at power plans in just a second. You can decide what you want to do when the power button is pressed, particularly on a laptop. You can choose whether or not the system should go to sleep, hibernate, shut down, or just do nothing. When a system goes to sleep, most system devices are turned off. However, RAM stays active in its current state. This means that you can quickly bring the system back into a full operational mode by simply hitting the power button. Eventually, however, a sleeping system will transition to a hibernated state. In a hibernated state, everything is turned off and the contents of the system memory are written to a file on the hard disk. The system resumes when it's powered back on, and it will be at the state it was when it was placed into hibernate mode. Basically, the RAM will be rewritten from that file on the hard disk. If you decide that a power button should shut the system down, it will turn it off. You can also disable the power button by configuring a power setting that says do nothing when the power button is hit. Power settings and policies can be centrally configured by using group policies, available at Computer Configuration, Administrative Templates, System, Power Management. You can require the use through group policy of one of Windows 7's built-in power plans. So if you can say, I want to use the balanced power plan across the organization, you can do that through group policy. If you happen to know the GUI ID of a custom power plan and you've moved that custom power plan to all of the machines in your organization, you can use that power plan instead. To determine the GUI ID of a power plan, from the command line, issue powerconfig-l to get a list of all the power plans and the related GUI IDs. There are a number of other important power configuration commands you should understand. One of the items you should understand how to use for the exam revolves around understanding which devices can wake a computer up. To see what computers or what devices can wake a computer up, issue powerconfig-device query wake from any. You can also create an energy policy report for using powerconfig-energy and then open the resulting report in Internet Explorer. The report is saved to a file named EnergyReport.html in the directory in which the command was run. You can export a power plan using powerconfig-export, export name GUI ID, and then import a power plan by using the powerconfig import file name and optionally the GUI ID of the power plan as well. And we're going to do all this in just a minute over on our Global Mantic sample servers. At this point, I'd like to give you a demonstration for how Global Mantic can use some of these power settings in their own organization. However, using a virtual machine for this purpose is very limiting because virtual machines don't have a lot of power options. Therefore, I'm actually going to use a laptop which has a lot more power options, and we're going to go through those power options on the laptop instead of on one of the Global Mantic virtual machines. This is actually a physical laptop, not a virtual machine in any way, shape, or form, that you're going to be able to see a lot more information. To get started, from the Start menu, go to Control Panel. Once you're in Control Panel, choose Power Options. And you're going to see on your screen a Power Options window open. By default, right on this machine, there are 3 power plans. One's called Balance, which is the recommended power plan, which gives a good balance of performance versus power savings. And the second one is High Performance, with a third one called Power Saver. I've opted for the high performance plan on this laptop because I needed to stay alive more than I want it to shut down. So after a certain period of time, the machine may shut down or the screen may go off under other power plans. However, I don't want that to happen with this particular laptop, so I've chosen the high performance power plan. And I'm going to quickly mention Power Saver basically is the least power option of the 3. This is going to be the one that gives you the most bang for your buck from a battery perspective, but it's also going to reduce computer performance in some cases to do it. So what does it mean when I'm running the high performance power plan? Well, you can get some details by clicking the Change Plan Settings button right next to the high performance plan. And as you can see here, we have the high performance plan. And you'll notice that this says on battery and plugged in. Now the reason you see both of these is because it's a laptop. If you're on a desktop, you're not going to see the on battery option because desktops don't have batteries to deal with. So the power settings you see are only for the kind of machine you're using. So if you're on a desktop, you're not going to see the battery options. Or if you're in a virtual machine, you won't see the battery options. You'll only see the plugged in options. Now, as you can see, by default, the power plan here is specified as you see on the screen. The display is dimmed after 5 minutes when it's on battery power, or 10 minutes when it's on AC power. You can click the down arrow next to any of these options and make changes. You can go anywhere from 1 minute to 5 hours, or choose never so that the machine never dims the display. Again, you can also make other changes such as changing the plan brightness, which is the brightness of the screen. The brighter the screen, the more power that's required in order to power that screen. So a slightly less bright screen can actually extend your battery life. There are also a number of advanced power options you can work with by clicking the Change Advanced Power Settings option. And as you can see, right now we're configuring the high performance plan, which is the active plan as noted by the word active next to the name. And if you want to change for other plans, then you can change for the balanced or the power saver plan. But let's take a look at just a few of these settings. Under the hard disk option, you'll notice that the hard disk can be turned off after a certain period of time. When it's on battery or when it's plugged in, the default here is to turn the hard disk off after 20 minutes. The hard disk does consume significant power because it has to spin all the time. By shutting the hard disk down, you're shutting down that spinning motion, so you're saving some power for your machine. You can also change wireless adapter settings. In this case, I have the machine configured for maximum performance. However, you can change the power setting for the wireless adapter to low power saving, medium power saving, or maximum power saving mode versus performance. You can choose what happens when the power button and lid is worked. If you click the power button or you close the lid. When you close the lid on this machine, it's going to go to sleep, but you have some other options here. You can have it do nothing, which basically would shut the lid and it would keep the machine live. You can have it go to sleep, hibernate, or shut down. Sleep is basically a shorter cycle than hibernate. When a machine is sleeping, there's still stuff working in RAM. So when you open the lid, you can come right back to what you were working on. Hibernate works in a similar way, except it shuts everything off. Everything is written to the hard disk, including the contents of memory. When you open the lid back up, all that stuff's read back into RAM, and you are then able to continue on working. And I think you're getting the idea here that there's quite a few things that you can modify. You can choose what actions to take at particular battery levels. You don't even see this option on a desktop machine because it doesn't have a battery. When you get to a critical battery action, that is that the battery is so low that the machine's in imminent danger of failing, you can force the machine to hibernate mode. When it's plugged in, obviously it doesn't matter, so you would just choose to do nothing. And you have a number of options here to how you can configure all that stuff. In this case, the critical battery level is 0%. So as soon as the battery gets to that 0% mark, there's going to be just enough juice left to hibernate the machine and shut it down, basically. In this case, I'd like to create a new power plan. So I'm going to create a sample power plan that we're going to use for some examples in this lesson. So I'll click the Create a Power Plan button. And the first thing you're asked is, on which power plan would you like to base this new power plan? You basically start with one of the existing power plans as a template to use for your new power plan. Well, I'm going to start with the balanced power plan, and I'm just going to name it Custom. And click Next. In this case, I'm going to change the plugged in plan to set the DIN display after 45 minutes, turn it off after 2 hours, and put the computer to sleep after 2 hours as well. So basically at the same time the display gets turned off, the computer is going to go to sleep. And I'll click Create. And what you'll see now is the custom power plan is the one that's active. If you choose Change Plan Settings and change Advanced Power Settings, if you look here, you'll see the custom is the active plan. So that's how you use the GUI to make changes to the power settings. You'll notice there's a number of other options over here that are pretty self-explanatory. Choose what the power buttons do, change when the computer sleeps, change when to turn off the display, and so forth. There are also a number of command line options that are used to manage power settings in Windows 7. You have to use an elevated command prompt for the power configuration. So I'll go to the Start menu, All Programs, Accessories, and I'll right-click Command Prompt and choose Run as Administrator. And here we go. I'm going to change to a directory that I've created to store my power plans, and I've named that directory Power. And there's nothing here. The first thing you need to do is be able to get a list of the power plans that are available on this machine. So I'm going to do Power Config-L. And you can see that there are 4 power plans that are configured on this machine. And they're as the ones that we saw before: Balanced, High Performance, Power Saver, and Custom. That's the way by which you get a list of the power plans that are available on your machine. Now, creating a power plan on one single machine is all well and good, but there comes a point at which you're going to want to take this power plan and move it to another machine or make it available across the organization. You can't configure a standardized, centralized power plan via group policy in Windows 7. So you may want to create a power plan on one of the desktops or laptops and then move that power plan into group policy and make it available to everyone in the organization. There's also times when you may want to delete a power plan. So we're going to actually go through all of that right now. We're going to start by exporting a power plan from this Windows 7 machine. And we use the power config command again to do that. Power CFG-export. And we're going to name it custom plan. That's the name of the file that we're going to write this custom plan to. Then we need to grab the GUI ID of the power plan. I'm just going to copy and paste the GUI ID that you see right here. Every power plan has its own unique GUI ID, and that's how it's identified. That's also the identifier that you'll use when you're using group policy to push this power plan out to other machines. So the GUI ID is pretty important. powerconfig-export custom plan GUI ID. And it was pretty quick, and if I do another directory listing, you'll see that there's a plan called custom plan, or a file called custom plan out here now. Now I'm going to delete the power plan that I just created. So I'm going to go back over to the control panel, and I'm going to make the high performance plan my default power plan. And when I go back to a command prompt and do powerconfig-L, you'll see that the high performance plan has now got the star, so it is the one that's actually active. Again, you can't delete an active power plan, so you have to actually change the power plan before you can delete one. Now I'll do powerconfig-delete, and you have to delete by GUI ID as well. Voila. Now if I do powerconfig-L, you'll see that that power plan is now gone. So let's say that this is a new machine. You've created this power plan called custom plan, and you've got it stored here on the file system, and you want to move it to another machine, or you want to move it into group policy. You need to import this power plan into group policy. But remember that GUI ID is very, very important. Whatever GUI ID this power plan has is the one you need to use for group policy. You can actually import a power plan and assign it its GUI ID from which it was exported with. So whatever GUI ID you used to use, you can actually give it that GUI ID again. So let's import this custom power plan again. We'll go powerconfig-import. And one thing that's very important, and where I've run into trouble before, is remembering you have to specify the full path to the power plan file that you create. If you don't, you will not be able to import the power plan, and you'll get error after error after error, and it'll drive you nuts until you remember, hey, I got to specify the path. So remember to specify the path when you're importing a power plan. I'm going to import this initially without a GUI ID. Now remember that up at the top here, the GUI ID looked a lot like this, A18. In fact, I'm going to expand the window here so you can see what happens. Look what happened. It imported a power scheme, and it assigned it this generic GUI ID of 100,000. Now, if you're moving this power plan to a centralized server for distribution via group policy, you may want to do this and give it a simpler GUI ID than the one that's created when you create a power plan via the GUI. This might be an easier method for you, but you can maintain that former GUI ID. So, how do you do that? Well, I'm going to delete this power plan again. So I'll do powerconfig-delete, and we'll paste this GUI ID. And it's gone. There you go. This time, I'm going to import the power plan and give it its old GUI ID, and you can see that right up here on the screen. So here's its old GUI ID. And this time, let's see what happens. I specified the file name twice, I apologize. Imported the power scheme successfully. And it has its old GUI ID. So if you, for some reason, want to be able to maintain the same GUI ID across the organization, if you have copied this power plan to every machine in the organization, make sure it has the same GUI ID so that it's easier to work with group policy. If you don't, it's going to create a lot of problems if you try to make this your default power plan via group policy. Location-aware printing is a brand new feature to Windows 7 that allows the automatic switching of the default printer depending on what network you're connected to. So let's say you have a machine you're taking home that you also use at work. When you get home, your default printer will automatically change to that inkjet printer you have sitting on the kitchen table. When you go to work, it'll automatically change to the high-speed laser printer down the hall. You don't have to do anything. That's awesome, because I'll tell you what, from a network administrator standpoint, people hate printers. Printers are a pain in the neck to deal with all the time because they change, drivers change, defaults change, the whole 9 yards. Location-aware printing can take some of the pain out of this for the users. There is a huge catch though. Location-aware printing is only available if you're using an actual laptop machine. If you have a desktop, location-aware printing doesn't work. Microsoft has made the assumption that if you have a desktop, it will not move between networks. It will not move between your home network and your work network, for example. So the feature is not even available. If you open up devices and printers from a desktop machine, you will not see Manage Default Printers, no matter how hard you try. I speak from experience on this. It took forever for me to figure out that that was not available on a desktop machine. Now, it should have been intuitive, I guess, because it's a mobile feature, but it just didn't click that Microsoft would actually limit it that way. So from devices and printers, when you have a laptop, you'll get a button that says Manage Default Printers. When you click that button, you're going to get a screen that looks just like this. Well, not just like, because you have different printers. You can decide if you want to have the same printer all the time. Always use the same printer as my default printer, or change my default printer when I change networks. If I'm on my home network, I'll use the Microsoft XPS Document Writer as my default printer. If I'm on the globalmantics.com network or some other work network, I'll use the HP LaserJet 2840 printer that I like to print to all the time. And that's location-aware printing in a nutshell. In this lesson, you'll learn how to enable work on the go using the offline files feature in Windows 7. We touched on transparent caching, and we'll talk more about transparent caching in the branch cache lesson in this course. You'll learn how to save energy by creating your own local power settings and how to import and export power profiles on your machine. We ended this lesson by looking at location-aware printing and how to quickly decide what kind of printer you want to print to at a particular network location. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.